I've met many hard-working people. Exceptionally hard-working. They have good jobs, stable incomes, strong resumes, a sense of responsibility, discipline, pride in doing things right. From the outside, they look like everything is in place. And yet, after years of observing people across different industries, ages, and income levels, I began to notice something deeply consistent. Most of them never truly feel financially safe. Not because they are reckless, not because they lack intelligence, not because they don't try hard enough, but because, deep down, they know something most people never say out loud. If they stop, everything stops with them. That quiet awareness never fully leaves, even when income increases, even when titles improve, even when life appears settled. We were taught that hard work creates security, that climbing higher in a career leads to peace of mind, that a strong paycheck equals stability. But if that were completely true, why does anxiety about the future persist for so many capable people? Why does the feeling of not enough remain, even when life looks objectively successful? The uncomfortable truth I've come to understand is this: money that exists only when you are present can never create lasting financial safety. You may be highly skilled, you may be respected, you may even be indispensable. But if your income depends entirely on your continued effort, your continued availability, your continued performance, then somewhere inside, you already know the structure is fragile. This isn't a personal failure, it's a structural one. I'm not writing this to suggest that work is wrong. Work has never been the problem. The problem begins when your entire financial life is built on constant exertion. When you stop, money stops. When you slow down, money slows down. When life interrupts you, income disappears. And the human nervous system was never designed to feel calm inside a system like that. The wealthy individuals I've observed, the ones who build wealth quietly and sustainably, are not necessarily more talented or more driven. Their defining difference is much simpler. They do not rely solely on income. They build things that continue to produce value even when they are not actively involved. Not to impress others, not to prove superiority, not to chase status, but to create a very different internal experience. The experience of knowing that life doesn't collapse the moment you step back. Most people are never taught to think about money this way. We are taught how to earn, how to perform, how to be productive, how to be useful. But rarely are we taught how to design financial systems where money no longer needs to be chased every single day. This book is not about getting rich quickly. It does not offer formulas, shortcuts, or tactics. It exists to help you see a simple but powerful truth. Financial peace does not come from earning more. It comes from removing your constant presence as a requirement for money to exist. When you begin to build real assets, money slowly changes its role. It stops being the goal you run after and becomes the byproduct of a structure that works. And when that shift happens, life begins to feel lighter in a very quiet way. Not because you suddenly have more than others, but because you are no longer carrying the same level of financial tension. This is the path the wealthy have taken for generations. Unannounced, unrushed, unimpressive on the surface, but deeply effective. And this book will walk you through that path, one layer of understanding at a time, so you can see how the wealthy build assets and why those assets continue to pay them long after the work itself is done. Chapter 1. Income is temporary. Assets are permanent. Income feels solid until it isn't. As long as it arrives on time, month after month, it creates the illusion of permanence. It feels dependable, predictable, safe. But income has a condition that is rarely acknowledged. It only exists while you do. The moment your presence becomes uncertain, income follows. This is not a criticism of work. Work is honorable. Work is necessary. But income, by definition, is fragile. It depends on your energy, your health, your availability, your relevance. And no matter how skilled or respected you become, those variables are never fully under your control. This is why income alone has never been a reliable foundation for long-term financial stability. Income rewards participation. Assets reward design. That single distinction quietly separates two very different financial experiences. Income requires repetition. Assets rely on structure. Income asks you to return tomorrow. Assets continue without asking. Income is tied to time. Assets are tied to systems. This is not a moral difference. It is a structural one. An income can be impressive. It can be high. It can be admired. And still, it remains temporary. Assets operate on a different logic. An asset is not money. Money itself does nothing. An asset is a structure that produces value beyond the moment of effort. It works while attention moves elsewhere. It repeats without supervision. It compounds without urgency. When effort ends and value continues, permanence begins to form. This is why two individuals with similar earnings can experience money in completely different ways. One feels constant pressure to maintain momentum. The other feels space. One senses vulnerability beneath success. The other senses resilience beneath simplicity. The difference is not intelligence. It is not ambition. It is architecture. High income without assets creates speed without stability. More effort supports more complexity, more responsibility, more exposure. Every interruption becomes a threat. Assets interrupt that pattern. They introduce separation between time and money, separation between presence and income, separation between effort and continuity. That separation is not dramatic. It is quiet, but it changes how the nervous system responds to money. Without assets, every slowdown feels dangerous. With assets, pauses become possible. This is why assets are often misunderstood. They appear slow, unremarkable, emotionally unrewarding. They do not respond to urgency. They do not celebrate effort. They do not validate busyness. They reward patience instead. They reward restraint. They reward consistency. They reward the ability to stay present without interference. This is why permanence is rarely visible in the beginning. Permanence does not announce itself. It accumulates. Income feels alive because it moves quickly. Assets feel dormant because they move steadily. But over time, steadiness outlasts speed. A paycheck is a promise. An asset is a process. Promises depend on conditions. Processes depend on time. Time is more reliable than circumstance. This is why lasting wealth is rarely loud. It does not require constant proof. It does not demand constant validation. It operates beneath the surface, absorbing shock rather than reacting to it. Assets do not eliminate uncertainty. They reduce exposure to it. That reduction is often mistaken for freedom. Freedom is not excess, it is insulation. And insulation is built through permanence. Income will always be temporary. Even the strongest income, even the most respected role, even the most secure position. Assets are not eternal, but they are persistent. They persist beyond effort, beyond motivation, beyond immediate reward. That persistence is what creates stability. Until this difference is understood, financial life feels like motion without ground. Once it is understood, the internal question changes. Not, how much can I earn? But, what continues when I step away? That question marks the transition from participation to ownership. And ownership, not income, is where lasting financial security begins. Chapter 2. The two types of people around money. Every financial system quietly shapes behavior. Not through rules written on paper, but through the roles people assume without realizing it. Around money, two identities naturally form. They are not defined by income level. They are not separated by intelligence. They are not divided by opportunity. They are defined by posture. One identity relates to money through participation. The other relates to money through ownership. The difference is subtle at first, but over time, it becomes absolute. The first identity asks a simple, familiar question: what do I need to do next? The second asks a different one: what will continue to work after I'm done? Both questions feel reasonable. Only one leads to permanence. The participant approaches money through effort. Effort feels honest. Effort feels fair. Effort feels controllable. You give time, you give energy, you receive compensation. The relationship is clear and direct. But it is also fragile, because participation requires renewal. Every day, the agreement must be reactivated. Every cycle, value must be proven again. Every interruption threatens continuity. This creates a specific internal state. Attention stays outward. Focus stays reactive. Security feels conditional. Not because the person is unaware, but because the structure demands constant engagement. The owner relates to money differently. Ownership is not about dominance. It is not about control over others. It is about control over structure. The owner does not ask money to reward effort. The owner asks systems to produce outcomes. This changes where energy flows. Instead of asking, "What must I do today?" the question becomes, "What did I build that continues today?" The shift is not dramatic. It is quiet, and it often begins long before results are visible. Participation creates motion. Ownership creates direction. Participation fills time. Ownership shapes time. Participation keeps you busy. Ownership keeps you aligned. Neither is morally superior, but they are not interchangeable. A life built entirely on participation feels full but tense. A life anchored in ownership feels slower but grounded. This is why people with similar incomes can experience money so differently. One feels constantly evaluated by it. The other feels supported by it. The difference is not confidence, it is positioning. Participation places you inside the system. Ownership places the system around you. Inside the system, you respond to demands. Around the system, you set conditions. This is not about control over outcomes. It is about control over exposure. Participants are exposed to volatility. Owners are exposed to time. Volatility amplifies emotion. Time rewards patience. This is why participants often feel urgency around money. Decisions feel compressed, mistakes feel expensive, delays feel dangerous. The system does not forgive pauses. Ownership introduces tolerance, tolerance for slow growth, tolerance for learning curves, tolerance for imperfection. Because the system does not depend on constant reaction, this difference shapes identity. Participants begin to see themselves as the source. Owners begin to see themselves as the architect. The source must always perform. The architect designs once and observes. The source feels pressure when energy dips. The architect expects variability and designs for it. This is why burnout rarely leads to wealth. Burnout is a signal of over-participation. Ownership reduces the need for personal intensity, not immediately, but inevitably. The wealthy rarely describe themselves as working harder. They describe themselves as positioned better. Position is not about advantage, it is about alignment. Alignment between effort and longevity. Participation prioritizes immediacy. Ownership prioritizes continuity. One feels productive today, the other feels stable tomorrow. Neither identity is chosen consciously at first. Most people inherit participation. It is taught early, rewarded publicly, validated socially. Ownership is rarely taught. It is learned through observation, through pattern recognition, through noticing what continues when attention shifts elsewhere. This is why ownership often appears unexciting. There is no applause, no clear milestone, no immediate feedback. Participation offers visible progress. Ownership offers quiet accumulation. One is praised, the other is trusted. Participants often believe ownership is out of reach. that it requires exceptional capital, exceptional risk tolerance, exceptional talent. But ownership is not a level of wealth. It is a way of relating to money. It begins with a single distinction: effort ends, structures persist. Once this distinction is seen, it cannot be unseen. You begin to notice where effort is being recycled without leverage, where motion is mistaken for progress, where busyness replaces durability. The identity begins to shift, not from ambition, but from fatigue, from the recognition that constant participation is unsustainable. Ownership does not remove responsibility. It changes where responsibility lives. Instead of living inside your body, it lives inside the system. Instead of living inside your calendar, it lives inside design. This is why ownership feels calmer, not because it guarantees success, but because it distributes weight. Weight across time, across process, across repetition. Participants carry weight daily. Owners distribute weight structurally. Over time, the difference compounds, not financially at first, psychologically. One identity tightens under pressure, the other loosens. One identity reacts, the other absorbs. And eventually, money responds accordingly. Not because money favors people, but because money follows structure. Participation attracts income. Ownership attracts continuity. Income comes and goes. Continuity remains. This is not a call to abandon work. It is an invitation to reposition it. Work becomes input, not dependence. Effort becomes seed, not survival. The shift from participant to owner is not a leap. It is a reorientation, a quiet decision to stop asking money to reward presence and begin asking systems to produce value. That decision changes what you notice, what you tolerate, what you build. And once it begins, the relationship with money changes permanently. Because money no longer asks who you are today. It asks what you've designed to continue tomorrow. Chapter 3. Assets are machines, not money. Money is often misunderstood because it looks active. It moves, it circulates, it changes hands quickly. This creates the illusion that money itself does the work. It doesn't. Money on its own is passive. It waits, it responds, it sits still until directed. What actually creates continuity is not money, but what money is built into. Assets are not piles of cash. They are structures. They are systems designed to repeat value without supervision. This is the distinction that quietly separates accumulation from dependence. A machine does not work harder because you want more output. It works according to how it was built. An asset behaves the same way. It does not respond to motivation. It does not accelerate because of urgency. It does not perform better under pressure. It simply executes its design. This is why assets feel unemotional. They do not care how you feel. They do not react to fear or excitement. They do not reward intensity. They reward alignment. When money is placed into a machine, it stops being potential and becomes process. This is where most people get confused. They focus on the money, not the structure. They ask how much they need instead of asking what will function. But money without structure behaves like energy without direction. It disperses. An asset contains direction. It channels effort into repetition. Once built, it does not ask again. This is why wealthy individuals often describe assets in functional terms, not emotionally, not aspirationally. They do not say, "This makes me rich." They say, "This runs." The language reveals the mindset. Running is mechanical, reliable, predictable. Machines are trusted because they are boring. They do the same thing tomorrow that they did yesterday. They do not surprise you. They do not impress you. They simply work. This reliability is what creates stability. Income is dependent on performance. Assets are dependent on integrity of design. When performance fluctuates, income reacts. When design is sound, assets persist. This is why the wealthy spend more time thinking about structure than reward. They ask questions like, does this system require constant attention? Does it break when conditions change? Does it depend on momentum to survive? These questions are not exciting, but they are decisive. Most people never ask them because they are trained to value activity. Activity feels alive. Movement feels productive. Structure feels slow. But slowness is not weakness. It is insulation. Machines are built to absorb variability. They continue when input changes. They adapt when conditions shift. Money placed into machines inherits these qualities. Money placed into effort does not. This is why high effort without assets creates exhaustion. Every gain must be defended. Every pause becomes risky. Every interruption feels personal. Assets remove that intimacy. They create distance. Distance between effort and outcome. Distance between mood and income. Distance between time and survival. This distance is often mistaken for detachment. It is not detachment. It is protection. Protection from volatility. Protection from urgency. Protection from emotional decision-making. This is why assets are often underestimated early. They do not provide immediate relief. They do not feel rewarding at first. They feel heavy. Like machines under construction. Energy goes in, but output is delayed. This delay filters people. Those seeking validation leave early. Those seeking continuity remain. The wealthy understand this dynamic intuitively. They are not patient by nature. They are patient by design. They build systems that make patience unavoidable. Once a machine is in place, interfering with it feels unnecessary. Letting it run feels natural. This is why assets quietly change behavior. They reduce the impulse to act. They reduce the need to intervene. They reduce emotional noise. The system takes over. And when systems take over, identity begins to shift. You stop seeing money as something to chase. You begin seeing it as something to deploy. Chasing requires energy. Deploying requires clarity. Clarity comes from understanding that money is not the engine. The engine is the asset. Money is fuel. Fuel does nothing until the engine exists. Once the engine exists, fuel becomes powerful. Without an engine, fuel is wasted. This is why people who suddenly receive money without structure often lose it. They have fuel, but no machine. The money moves, but nothing repeats. Repetition is what builds permanence. Assets repeat. That repetition is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention, but over time, it becomes undeniable. The machine continues. The output accumulates. The need for constant effort diminishes. This is when money changes meaning. It stops being a source of tension. It stops being a measure of worth. It stops being a daily concern. It becomes infrastructure. And infrastructure is felt, not noticed. You don't think about electricity when it works. You don't admire plumbing when it flows. You simply live. Assets create the same effect. When they function properly, they disappear from conscious thought. This invisibility is not weakness, it is success. Wealth that demands attention is not yet stable. Wealth that operates quietly has crossed into permanence. This is why the question is never how much money you have. The question is always, what does your money run inside? If the answer is effort, it will exhaust you. If the answer is structure, it will support you. Assets are not money. They are machines. And machines, once built correctly, do not care how hard you are trying. They care how well they were designed. That design determines whether money remains temporary or becomes something that continues. Chapter 4. Why the wealthy start smaller than you think. Wealth rarely begins with scale. It begins with direction. This is one of the most counterintuitive truths about long-term financial success, and also one of the most consistently misunderstood. Many assume that meaningful assets require meaningful size, that serious wealth demands serious capital, that real ownership begins only after a certain threshold is crossed. But this belief reverses the actual sequence. The wealthy do not start big. They start aligned. They understand something subtle. Scale amplifies structure, but it does not correct it. If the structure is weak, scale accelerates failure. If the structure is sound, even small beginnings compound quietly. This is why wealth often looks unimpressive at the start. It does not announce itself. It does not demand recognition. It does not feel urgent. It feels almost insignificant. And that is precisely why it works. Starting small is not about limitation. It is about clarity. Small beginnings reveal whether something can survive without force. They expose flaws early. They test repetition. They reveal whether value persists when attention moves away. Large beginnings hide these truths. They cover fragility with momentum. They mask inefficiency with volume. They delay feedback until it becomes expensive. The wealthy prefer feedback early. Not because they enjoy correction, but because correction is cheapest when scale is minimal. This is why they are comfortable beginning quietly. They are not seeking validation. They are seeking confirmation. Confirmation that something continues without intervention. Most people resist starting small because small feels slow, and slowness is uncomfortable in a culture that celebrates speed. Speed feels powerful. Speed feels decisive. Speed feels like progress, but speed without alignment creates pressure. Pressure to maintain, pressure to repeat, pressure to escalate. Small beginnings remove that pressure. They allow space for observation, space for adjustment, space for understanding what truly drives continuation. This is not patience as a personality trait. It is patience as a structural advantage. The wealthy are not calm because they are disciplined. They are calm because their systems do not demand constant escalation. Small assets teach this lesson naturally. They force attention onto durability rather than excitement. They ask a quiet question over and over. Will this still exist if I stop pushing? If the answer is no, the structure is not ready. Starting small makes this question unavoidable. This is why many people delay starting at all. They wait for readiness, for confidence, for certainty. But readiness does not precede structure. Structure creates readiness. Small beginnings are how structure reveals itself. The wealthy understand that early discomfort is informational. Confusion shows what is unclear. Resistance shows what is fragile. Boredom shows what lacks depth. These signals are valuable. They guide design. Large beginnings drown them out. This is why wealth built slowly often lasts longer. It is informed by friction. It is shaped by constraint. It grows in proportion to understanding. Scale does not create strength. Strength earns scale. This principle applies beyond money. Anything that survives repetition at a small level can be trusted more at a larger one. Anything that requires intensity to exist will collapse when intensity fades. Small assets survive without intensity. They do not rely on motivation. They do not need urgency. They function through design. This is what the wealthy are watching for. Not growth, but independence. Independence from mood. Independence from attention. Independence from constant reinforcement. This independence is not visible immediately. It is felt. It feels like something that does not demand you. Something that does not react to neglect. Something that continues quietly in the background. That feeling is not excitement. It is relief. Relief that effort is no longer the only thing holding everything together. This is why the wealthy are often unimpressed by large numbers early on. They have seen large numbers collapse. They are impressed by small systems that refuse to disappear. Systems that persist through neglect, through distraction, through uncertainty. These systems earn trust, and trust precedes expansion. Expansion without trust creates anxiety. Expansion with trust creates stability. This is why small beginnings are not a phase to rush through. They are the phase where everything important is learned. They reveal whether something is a machine or merely motion. Motion looks impressive. Machines endure. The wealthy wait for endurance. They are not in a hurry because they are not racing. They are positioning. Positioning is invisible. It does not produce applause, but it produces leverage. Leverage does not come from size. It comes from reliability. Reliability is proven quietly. This is why wealth built correctly often appears slow from the outside, but from the inside it feels steady. There is no constant pressure to perform, no need to impress, no fear of stepping away. The system carries itself, and once that is felt, scale becomes optional rather than necessary. Growth becomes a choice, not a requirement. This is the hidden advantage of starting small. It trains you to notice what matters, not how fast something grows, but how well it survives. Not how impressive it looks, but how calmly it continues. The wealthy do not rush past this stage. They respect it, because this is where permanence is decided. Not in scale, not in size, but in whether something can stand on its own. Chapter 5. Compounding only rewards the calm. Compounding is often described as a mathematical phenomenon, a formula, a curve, a function of time. But this description misses its most important dimension. Compounding is psychological. It does not reward intelligence. It does not reward speed. It does not reward ambition. It rewards calm, not surface calm, not forced patience, but the kind of calm that allows something to remain untouched long enough to mature. This is why compounding is so widely admired and so rarely experienced. Most people understand it conceptually. Very few can live with it emotionally. Compounding requires waiting without reassurance. It requires continuing without visible confirmation. It requires trusting process over feedback, and the human mind struggles with that. The urge to intervene is strong, to optimize, to accelerate, to extract results early. These urges feel rational. They feel responsible. But in the presence of compounding, they are destructive. Compounding is fragile in its early stages. Not because it is weak, but because it is invisible. When nothing appears to be happening, interference feels justified. But interference resets the process. It breaks continuity. It interrupts accumulation. It replaces patience with activity. This is why compounding does not reward effort. It rewards restraint. The wealthy understand this intuitively. They do not ask compounding to move faster. They ask themselves to move less. They reduce unnecessary action. They remove emotional decision-making. They create conditions where calm becomes unavoidable. This is not discipline through willpower. It is discipline through structure. Structures that do not invite constant choice. Structures that limit reaction. Structures that allow time to do its work uninterrupted. Time is the true partner of compounding. Not time measured in units, but time allowed to pass without disruption. This is where most people fail. Not because they lack understanding, but because they lack tolerance for stillness. Stillness feels like stagnation. Silence feels like risk. Waiting feels like falling behind. So they act, they adjust, they switch, they react. Each action feels small, harmless. But compounding does not reset partially. It resets completely. Every restart returns you to the beginning. This is why many people feel like they are always almost there. They are constantly restarting compounding without realizing it. The wealthy do not see compounding as growth. They see it as preservation. Preservation of continuity, preservation of direction, preservation of time already invested. This perspective changes behavior. Instead of asking, "What can I do next?" they ask, "What should I avoid touching?" Avoidance becomes strategy. Avoiding panic, avoiding impatience, avoiding unnecessary improvement. Improvement is not always progress. In compounding systems, improvement too early destroys momentum. This is uncomfortable to accept. Because modern culture celebrates optimization, we are taught to refine constantly, to iterate aggressively, to never stand still. But compounding requires something countercultural. It requires letting things be imperfect long enough to become powerful. Calm is not passive in this context. It is active non-intervention. The decision to stay still when action is available. The decision to wait when alternatives appear. The decision to trust time over instinct. These decisions do not feel heroic. They feel boring. This is why compounding is not glamorous. There is no dramatic moment, no visible breakthrough, no clear milestone. There is only continuity. And continuity is quiet. The wealthy are comfortable with quiet progress. They do not measure success by excitement. They measure it by stability. They are not disturbed by slow movement. They are disturbed by volatility. Volatility signals fragility. Calm signals alignment. This is why compounding often feels slowest, right before it becomes meaningful. The mind expects feedback proportional to effort. Compounding does not operate on that schedule. It withholds visible results until structure is proven. This delay filters people. Those who need reassurance leave early. Those who can tolerate ambiguity remain. The remaining few experience something different, a shift in relationship with time. Time stops feeling like an enemy. It stops feeling like pressure. It becomes an ally that works continuously as long as it is not interrupted. This alliance changes posture. Urgency fades. Decisions slow. Confidence becomes quieter. Not because outcomes are guaranteed, but because the process no longer depends on constant correction. This is the paradox of compounding. The less you interfere, the more it works. The more you trust, the more it rewards. But trust here is not belief. It is behavior. It is the behavior of not touching what does not need touching. It is the behavior of allowing systems to mature at their own pace. The wealthy are not immune to doubt. They simply design their environment so doubt has limited influence. They reduce the number of decisions. They reduce exposure to noise. They reduce opportunities to panic. In doing so, calm becomes the default, and calm is the true engine of compounding. This is why compounding feels inaccessible to many. Not because it is complex, but because it demands emotional maturity. The maturity to wait without proof, to continue without applause, to resist the urge to intervene. This maturity is not taught. It is developed through experience, often through failure, through seeing how much progress was lost to impatience, how much continuity was broken by fear. Those lessons leave a mark. They teach respect for time. The wealthy respect time deeply, not as a resource to exploit, but as a force to cooperate with. They do not rush it. They do not challenge it. They align with it. This alignment creates leverage. Leverage not from action, but from duration. Duration amplifies everything. Good structures become strong. Weak structures collapse. Compounding reveals truth. It cannot be faked. It cannot be forced. It responds only to calm continuity. This is why the calm eventually outperform the clever. Not because they know more, but because they interfere less. They allow time to finish what design began. And once compounding reaches maturity, it no longer needs protection. It protects itself. At that point, growth appears inevitable. But what looks inevitable at the end was simply uninterrupted calm at the beginning. Chapter 6. Why most people never build real assets. There is a quiet reason real assets remain rare. It has little to do with knowledge, and even less to do with opportunity. The true barrier is psychological. Real assets demand a kind of endurance most people were never trained to develop. They ask for commitment without applause. consistency without recognition, patience without reassurance. And that combination feels unnatural in a world built on feedback. Most people are conditioned to respond to signals. Praise, results, validation. When those signals disappear, motivation collapses. Real assets remove those signals early. They operate silently. They grow invisibly. They offer no proof that progress is happening. This creates discomfort. Not dramatic discomfort, subtle discomfort. The kind that whispers, "This might not be working." That whisper is powerful. It invites action, intervention, change, and each change resets the process. This is why many people believe they are building, when in reality they are restarting repeatedly. They mistake motion for continuity. Real assets require staying with something long enough for repetition to replace effort. That waiting period feels empty. Nothing new appears. Nothing exciting happens. So the mind looks for stimulation elsewhere. This is not weakness. It is conditioning. We are trained to expect progress to feel active. Real asset building feels inactive. It feels like standing still while the world celebrates movement. This creates internal conflict, a sense of falling behind, a sense of missing out, a sense that something else must be better. That sense is not intuition. It is impatience disguised as insight. The wealthy learn to recognize this pattern, not intellectually, experientially. They notice how often early abandonment destroys potential. They see how frequently progress dies, not from failure, but from restlessness. Restlessness is expensive. It leads to premature extraction, premature optimization, premature switching, all of which feel responsible in the moment. But responsibility toward what? Toward comfort, toward certainty, toward short-term emotional relief. Real assets demand responsibility toward the future, a future that does not offer immediate confirmation. This creates tension. Most people resolve that tension by choosing certainty now over possibility later. They return to what feels productive, what feels familiar, what feels validated. Effort gives feedback. Assets delay it. Effort feels earned. Assets feel uncertain. So effort wins again and again. This is why real assets are not crowded. Not because they are inaccessible, but because they are uncomfortable. They require trust in structure over sensation. Trust is not belief. It is behavior in the absence of proof. Most people cannot sustain that. They are not wrong. They are simply trained for a different environment. An environment where output follows input closely, where action is rewarded quickly, where pauses feel dangerous. Real assets invert that environment. They reward delayed response. They punish interference. They favor those who can tolerate ambiguity. Ambiguity is emotionally taxing. It creates doubt. Doubt is not neutral. It demands resolution. Resolution often comes through action. Action relieves anxiety, but action disrupts compounding. This is the trap. The act of relieving discomfort destroys the very thing that would have resolved it permanently. The wealthy eventually see this clearly. They realize that discomfort is not a signal to change direction. It is a signal that the process is still early. Early stages always feel unstable. Not because they are failing, but because they have not accumulated weight yet. Weight comes from repetition. Repetition comes from staying. Staying without reassurance. This is where most people exit. They are not pushed out. They step away, quietly, rationally, confident that they are making a smart adjustment. Years later, they wonder why nothing durable ever formed. Real assets also challenge identity. They require you to accept invisibility. No one notices quiet accumulation. No one applauds delayed payoff. Social identity weakens. Ego feels unfulfilled. This is another reason abandonment feels logical. Visibility feels safer than invisibility. Recognition feels like progress. Real assets often remove both. The wealthy learn to separate self-worth from visibility. They do not require external affirmation to continue. They find reassurance in structure. They watch whether something continues, not whether it is admired. This shift takes time, often years, and it usually comes after disappointment, after seeing how fragile visible success can be, after realizing how quickly momentum disappears when attention is removed. That realization creates humility. Humility changes behavior. It reduces urgency. It reduces reactivity. It reduces the need to be seen. This is why asset building often begins after failure. Failure strips illusion. It teaches respect for endurance. Those who never fail often never build real assets. They confuse success with sustainability. They learn too late that applause does not compound. Real assets also force confrontation with boredom. Boredom is not emptiness. It is the absence of stimulation. In that absence, truth emerges. Truth about whether something can survive repetition. Truth about whether value is inherent or dependent on energy. Boredom is revealing. Most people escape it. The wealthy learn to listen to it. They ask what boredom is showing them. If boredom persists, structure is weak. If boredom fades and continuity remains, structure is forming. This discernment is rare. It cannot be taught quickly. It must be lived. This is why most people never build real assets. Not because they lack resources, but because they lack tolerance. Tolerance for silence, tolerance for delay, tolerance for ambiguity. Real assets require all three. Those who develop them eventually experience something unexpected. Relief. Relief from constant engagement. Relief from emotional swings. Relief from needing to react. This relief is subtle, but once felt, it becomes unmistakable. And from that point on, the desire to abandon quiet systems fades. Because something has changed internally. The need for reassurance weakens. The need for speed dissolves. Continuity becomes enough. That is when real assets finally form. Not when motivation is highest, but when interference is lowest. Chapter 7. When money starts working for you. There is a moment that does not announce itself. No celebration, no clear milestone, no dramatic shift others can see. But internally, everything changes. It is the moment you realize money no longer needs your constant involvement to exist. Not all of it, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to feel the difference. Enough to notice a new quality in your decisions. This moment is not about abundance. It is about relief. Relief from the pressure to perform every day. Relief from the feeling that everything depends on your next move. Relief from the constant vigilance money once required. When money starts working for you, it does not rush. It does not arrive loudly. It does not demand attention. It simply continues. And continuity changes posture. Before this moment, money feels fragile. Every decision feels consequential. Every pause feels risky. Every mistake feels expensive. The future feels compressed into the present. Urgency becomes the default. After this moment, urgency loosens. Not because risk disappears, but because exposure is reduced. The system carries part of the weight. This is the quiet transition few people talk about. Not because it is secret, but because it is difficult to describe without numbers or tactics. It is felt, not explained. The relationship with money changes first psychologically. Decisions slow down. You stop reacting to noise. You stop chasing confirmation. You stop measuring progress daily. Time expands. Not objectively, but experientially. You no longer feel pushed forward by necessity. You begin to choose. Choice is the first sign money is working for you. Not choice in consumption, but choice in attention. Where to focus, what to ignore, what to leave untouched. This is when restraint becomes natural, not forced. You do not need discipline to avoid interference. Interference simply feels unnecessary. This is the opposite of how most people experience money. For most, money creates pressure to act, to optimize, to adjust, to respond. When money works for you, action becomes optional. Optional action is power. Power not over outcomes, but over pace. Pace determines sustainability. Sustainability determines longevity. Longevity is what money responds to. This is why money tends to flow towards stability, not excitement, not intensity, not brilliance. Stability. Systems that persist attract capital naturally, not because they promise return, but because they reduce uncertainty. When money works for you, uncertainty does not vanish. It becomes distributed. Distributed across systems, across time, across structure. This distribution changes emotional response. Fear becomes informational, not directive. Concern becomes analytical, not paralyzing. You still care, but you no longer panic. This calm is not confidence, it is capacity. Capacity to absorb fluctuation without reaction. This is why the wealthy appear unhurried. They are not indifferent, they are insulated. Insulation creates space. Space creates clarity. Clarity creates better decisions. Better decisions reinforce stability. The cycle becomes self-supporting. This is the real compounding few notice. Not financial compounding first. Psychological compounding. Calm decisions accumulate. Reduced errors compound. Non-interference accelerates continuity. Money responds to this environment. Not because it is intelligent, but because it follows structure. Structure that works invites more work. Capital seeks environments where it does not need protection. When money requires protection, it drains energy. When money is protected by design, it multiplies quietly. This is why the transition often feels anticlimactic. You expect a breakthrough. You receive a release. You expect excitement. You experience steadiness. You expect arrival. You notice absence. The absence of pressure, the absence of urgency, the absence of constant mental accounting. This absence is misinterpreted by many. They assume nothing has happened. In reality, everything has shifted. The role of money has changed. It no longer dictates behavior. It supports it. This support allows identity to evolve. You stop seeing yourself as the engine. You become the steward. Stewardship feels different from control. Control demands vigilance. Stewardship requires observation. Observation is calmer. You watch systems run. You notice patterns. You intervene only when necessary. Necessary intervention is rare. This rarity preserves continuity. Continuity is what money trusts. Money is cautious. It avoids chaos. It avoids instability. It avoids environments that demand constant rescue. When money begins to work for you, it senses safety. Safety invites accumulation. Accumulation invites resilience. Resilience deepens calm. The loop reinforces itself. This is why the wealthy rarely describe the moment money started working for them. It does not feel like a victory. It feels like a weight being removed. A weight you did not realize you were carrying until it was gone. Life does not become easier immediately, but it becomes lighter. Lighter decisions, lighter reactions, lighter attention. You stop managing money daily. You start managing direction occasionally. Direction management requires far less energy. This frees energy for thinking. Thinking longer term, thinking structurally, thinking beyond immediate needs. This is when money truly changes function. It stops being a source of motivation. It becomes infrastructure. Infrastructure supports life without demanding focus. You do not think about roads while driving. You do not think about water while it flows. Money, when working correctly, becomes similar. It fades into the background. And when money fades into the background, life moves forward, not faster, but steadier. This steadiness is not visible to outsiders. It cannot be posted. It cannot be measured socially. But internally, it is unmistakable. You no longer feel chased by time. You no longer feel pressured by scarcity. You're not rich in numbers, you're rich in margin. Margin is the true indicator money is working for you. Margin of time, margin of choice, margin of error. With margin, life becomes negotiable. Without margin, everything feels final. This is why the wealthy protect margin above all else. They know once money works for you, protecting that state becomes more important than accelerating it. Acceleration reintroduces fragility. Fragility reintroduces urgency. Urgency destroys calm. Calm is the environment where money thrives. This is the moment the journey quietly turns, not outwardly, but internally. And from that moment forward, money no longer asks for your attention. It simply continues. Chapter 8. From worker identity to owner identity. The final shift is not financial, it is internal. Long before wealth becomes visible, identity changes quietly. Most people believe money changes who you are. In reality, who you believe you are determines how money behaves around you. The worker identity is not defined by employment, it is defined by orientation. A worker sees themselves as the source of effort, the source of momentum, the source of continuity. When things move forward, it is because they are pushing. When things slow down, it feels personal. This identity creates pressure. Pressure to stay useful, pressure to stay relevant, pressure to stay active. Even when income is high, the nervous system never fully relaxes, because the worker knows something instinctively. If I stop, everything weakens. This belief shapes behavior subtly but persistently. Decisions become reactive. Rest feels undeserved. Pauses feel dangerous. The worker identity keeps the system alive by staying inside it. The owner identity emerges when this burden becomes visible. Not unbearable, just noticeable. There is a moment of quiet recognition. I'm holding too much of this together. This recognition does not come from ambition. It comes from fatigue. Fatigue from being indispensable. The owner identity does not seek escape from responsibility. It seeks relocation of responsibility away from the self, into structure. An owner does not ask, "How can I do more?" They ask, "What should not need me?" This question changes everything. It removes ego from the equation. It removes self-worth from productivity. The system becomes the focus. What survives without attention? What repeats without motivation? What holds shape when energy fluctuates? The owner identity is comfortable with redundancy. Redundancy feels wasteful to a worker. To an owner, it feels safe. Safety is not emotional comfort. It is structural resilience. The worker identity values effort because effort is visible. The owner identity values design because design is durable. This shift is subtle. There is no declaration, no sudden confidence, just a gradual change in what feels important. Urgency fades, observation increases. The owner watches rather than reacts. They notice patterns. They notice stress points. They notice what requires constant rescue, and instead of responding emotionally, they redesign quietly. This is why ownership feels slower. It replaces motion with intention. Intention does not rush. It waits for clarity. Clarity does not come from activity. It comes from distance. The owner creates distance intentionally. Distance between self and outcome. Distance between mood and money. Distance between effort and survival. This distance is not disengagement. It is maturity. Maturity allows responsibility to exist without identity attachment. If something fails, the owner studies the structure. The worker internalizes the failure. This difference protects energy. The worker spends energy proving worth. The owner spends energy preserving systems. Preservation compounds. Proof exhausts. This is why many capable people never become wealthy in a lasting way. They are too invested in being the source. They believe value comes from presence. The owner understands value comes from continuity. Continuity does not require constant presence. It requires thoughtful absence. Absence forces systems to reveal weakness. Weakness invites redesign. Redesign strengthens structure. Structure reduces dependence. Dependence reduction changes identity. The loop is slow, but it is irreversible. Once you stop seeing yourself as the engine, you cannot unsee it. The identity loosens. You no longer measure your day by output. You measure it by alignment. Alignment between what exists and what continues. This alignment creates peace, not the peace of certainty, but the peace of proportion. You are no longer oversized in your own system. You fit. When identity fits structure, stress dissolves naturally. The owner identity does not remove risk, it reframes it. Risk becomes a design variable, not a personal threat. Failure becomes information, not self-judgment. This emotional shift is profound. It frees attention. Attention is the rarest resource in any financial system. The worker spends attention on survival. The owner spends attention on direction. Direction requires less energy than survival. This energy surplus is subtle. It accumulates quietly. Better thinking, better pacing, better restraint. Money responds to this environment, not because it recognizes people, but because it follows coherence. Coherent systems attract resources. Incoherent systems repel them. The owner identity creates coherence by default, not through force, but through design. This is why wealth often stabilizes after identity shifts. Not because strategy suddenly improves, but because interference decreases. The system is allowed to become itself. This allowance is rare. Most people cannot tolerate stepping back without feeling irrelevant. The owner tolerates it easily, because relevance has moved from self to structure. This is the quietest and most powerful transition in the entire journey. It does not feel like success. It feels like relief. Relief from self-importance. Relief from constant proving. Relief from carrying what should never have been carried alone. At this point, money no longer defines direction. Direction defines money. Money becomes responsive rather than directive. Life stops feeling conditional, not because outcomes are guaranteed, but because identity is no longer hostage to them. The owner identity does not promise wealth. It allows it. It creates the conditions where wealth can exist without effort being consumed by it. This is the final understanding. Wealth is not something you achieve. It is something that emerges when identity, structure, and time align. The worker tries to hold everything together. The owner lets the system do its work. And once that shift occurs, there's no return to the old way of seeing. Because you no longer ask what you must do. You ask what must continue. That question does not fade. It becomes permanent, just like the systems it creates. I did not write this book to convince you to chase wealth. There is already enough noise doing that. I wrote it to describe a quieter truth, one that becomes visible only after years of observation. Wealth, in its lasting form, is rarely dramatic. It does not arrive with urgency. It does not demand attention. It settles. And when it settles, it changes how life feels far more than how life looks. Throughout this book, I have spoken about assets, systems, compounding, identity, and structure. But beneath all of that is a single idea that took me a long time to understand. Money responds to how you organize your life. Not how intensely you want it, not how hard you try, but how coherently things are designed. This realization did not come from theory. It came from watching patterns repeat. I watched people work relentlessly and remain anxious. I watched others move slowly and gain stability. I watched momentum fail where structure succeeded. I watched intelligence collapse under pressure while patience quietly endured. Over time, the pattern became undeniable. The people who felt safest around money were not the ones who earned the most. They were the ones who needed themselves the least to keep things running. That is not a popular message. It does not flatter effort. It does not reward urgency. It does not promise quick validation. But it is honest. We live in a world that praises visibility, that celebrates speed, that confuses motion with progress. In such a world, it is easy to believe that wealth must feel intense. But intensity does not create stability. Alignment does. When income is the only thing holding life together, tension becomes constant. When assets begin to take over, tension dissolves gradually. This is not because life becomes easy. It is because life becomes buffered. Buffering is the true gift of wealth. Not luxury, not status, not excess, but margin. Margin of time, margin of choice, margin of error. Margin allows you to breathe. Without margin, even success feels fragile. With margin, even uncertainty becomes manageable. The journey described in this book is not a strategy. It is a reorientation. A reorientation away from proving and toward preserving. Away from reaction and toward design. Away from self as engine and toward structure as support. This shift does not happen all at once. It unfolds quietly. You notice yourself interfering less. You notice decisions slowing down. You notice a growing comfort with silence. These are not signs of stagnation. They are signs of maturity. Understanding money at this level does not make you aggressive. It makes you selective. You stop needing everything to work immediately. You stop extracting value prematurely. You stop confusing activity with effectiveness. You begin to trust time. Trusting time changes behavior. It reduces panic. It reduces unnecessary action. It reduces the emotional swings that destroy continuity. When behavior changes, outcomes follow naturally, not explosively, but sustainably. This is why wealth that lasts often looks unimpressive while it is being built. There's nothing to point at, nothing to announce, nothing to show, only quiet systems doing what they were designed to do. That quiet is uncomfortable for many. It feels like nothing is happening, but something is happening. Continuity is forming. Continuity is invisible until it isn't. And when it becomes visible, it no longer needs explanation. It simply exists. I am not interested in telling you what to do next. That would miss the point. The value of understanding is not instruction, it is orientation. Once orientation changes, behavior adjusts on its own. You begin to notice what drains you. You begin to notice what depends on you too heavily. You begin to notice where effort is being recycled without leverage. These observations lead to quieter choices. Choices to remove yourself slowly. Choices to redesign gently. Choices to let systems reveal their weaknesses. None of this feels heroic, but heroics were never the path to stability. Consistency is. Consistency is built through structures that tolerate imperfection, through systems that continue even when attention fades, through assets that do not require constant affirmation. This is why the wealthy protect their systems more than their image. Image fluctuates. Systems endure. When systems endure, identity softens. You no longer define yourself by output. You no longer measure your worth by productivity. You become less urgent. Urgency is expensive. It leads to mistakes. It leads to extraction. It leads to decisions made under pressure. Calm decisions compound. Not because they are smarter, but because they are fewer. Fewer decisions mean fewer errors. Fewer errors mean greater continuity. Continuity is what money follows. Money does not chase excitement. It avoids instability. When your life becomes structurally stable, money behaves differently around you. It becomes less dramatic, less threatening, less consuming. It becomes infrastructure. Infrastructure supports life quietly. You don't think about it. You don't manage it constantly. You simply live. That is the real promise of wealth. Not abundance without effort, but stability without anxiety. This book is complete not when you finish reading it, but when you stop needing it, when the ideas dissolve into behavior, when the questions become internal, when the orientation becomes natural. At that point, understanding has done its work. It has moved from thought to structure. And when understanding becomes a way of living, money has no choice but to respond. Not quickly, not loudly, but faithfully, over time.